So I didn't realize how annoying and tedious this would be to really look into the Oculus Go. This will be a discussion about me trying to figure out how the virtual environments work. At the end of the day, you would think that the Oculus Go, which had virtual environments at the beginning of its lifetime, would still be there in the year of 2025, but that isn't the case. If you saw my previous video about unlocking the Oculus Go, you would know that basically Meta or Facebook or whatever you want to call it essentially broke the Oculus Go when they unlocked it, because they honestly just didn't care about the servers or anything else that kind of makes the Oculus work. And even though they unlocked it, their services or their main base OS doesn't give you the normal stuff you would have saw when you first had the Oculus. And for me personally, this was a big deal. A lot of people tried to tell me, oh, well, it's just good for video, blah, blah, blah. And I don't care what's coming out of their mouth. At the end of the day, I wanted it the way I had it in 2018, and that was the main reason I bought it. When I had it in 2018, I was able to have multiple different virtual background environments. I was able to choose games. I was able to do things. And I understand that maybe Meta doesn't now support those games anymore, so you may have to do a different way to get those games. I understand that. But the virtual environments, that could have at least been stayed. That could have at least been modified as far as how the Oculus Go works, so that any of the actual things that were in the list for virtual environments you can have. A lot of people report now that when they get their Oculus turned back on in this day and age, it'll be black. And for me, I've noticed that it was black the moment I basically had to reset my Oculus, as I mentioned in my previous video. But then it turned into like this kind of default grayish background. And for me, I'm going to be honest, that was kind of fine, but I still wanted to know how the Oculus worked, especially because that Zen background that I had from 2018, I was going to use for meditation and everything. So for me, that background was extremely important. And yes, I could buy another headset, but I had this already. I don't want to spend $200+ just to have a nice Zen VR background headset. I already had it. So for me, it was a priority to figure out, how do you select a virtual environment background in the Oculus Go? So obviously this requires reverse engineering what's going on with the Oculus. And I do have some experience with doing some reverse engineering of understanding what's going on. Don't get me wrong, it's just that this was something that was a side project, so I don't really have the time for it, although I'm very interested in it, so it kind of annoys me. The first way I was going to kind of try to look into reverse engineering this was to try to figure out what logs happen when I do actions on the screen. The number one way to be able to know what's going on as far as logs when you're interacting with your Oculus headset will be ADB Logcat. It is a command that you can use with ADB, which comes with Android's like SDK kits. I've already had it because I actually had already been used to creating Android apps. So for me, it wasn't a big deal to just start up ADB and then from there be able to use Logcat against the Oculus headset to kind of figure out what's going on. Logcat is pretty robust. It reminds me of like syslog on Linux or the event viewer in Windows. It's just a lot of robust data. So you can parse it and filter it down. But for me, I needed to know exactly what was going on. So I just needed pure Logcat. So the idea that I first had was that I'm gonna go into the settings portion. I'm going to then go to the section where you would choose a virtual environment, and then I'm going to try to read the actual logs to see what's going on at that time. When I first saw the logs, I saw that there was some sort of variable that they said about selected environment, something like that. And so that looked very curious to me. I wasn't necessarily sure what was controlling that, but I knew that there was a variable that was setting this, and it looked like it was setting it to an integer at the time. And so for me, I'm like, okay, that's odd. Maybe there are different integers that correlate to different backgrounds. I'm not necessarily sure. I'm gonna have to figure out where this is being manipulated from. Are they manipulating this from a variable that gets started up when I run the actual settings? I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. And so I go into doing multiple different ways of trying to find this word of selected environment or whatever it's called for finding out my own personal environment. The first thing that I do is that I try to take these APK packages from different applications, and then I try to decompile them so that I can use VS Code to kind of see if that string is inside of the code. And I didn't notice it, but I had noticed that the code is in Somali, which is Java bytecode language, or like Java reverse bytecode. I'm not really as familiar with Somali as I am with Java, so that kind of threw me off and made it so that it was harder for me to look into at that time. So I decided I was going to skip over that for now. I'll have to come back to it at some point, but I'm going to skip over that and see if maybe they have a database or something going on. I search out the actual Linux instance of the Oculus headset, and I find multiple different databases. I find a systems database. I think I found a settings database or something, and I found a users database. I use ADB pull to download those database files off of the Oculus headset onto my computer. And then I use dbeaver to actually open up the database on each of those files and see what's inside of there. And I was able to find that variable in the users database. Now this is great. I was able to therefore get something that helps me to understand that this is most likely what's controlling everything on the screen. So when I first look at it, it seems that this is set to 0. Now, I am not sure as to why that was the case, and it kind of concerned me. So I was like, all right, now that I know where the actual cell is for controlling that variable, maybe now I can maybe set the variable to something different. Instead of 0, maybe I could set it to 1, or maybe I could set it to 2, and I could see something different. So I tried doing that. I would go into the user's database and set that variable to 1, and then I would push back that user's DB file along with restarting the Oculus headset, everything like that, and then trying it again, and it was still black. And from that, I was thinking, okay, this is a bigger issue. Maybe I still am not sure what's going on, and it kind of led me down a worser path because I wasn't sure what's going on. If I manipulate something and it's showing me the same effect, I'm not even sure if what I'm even doing is even making an effect, if that makes any sense. So this became a bigger issue. And so I decided, you know what, let me completely blank out the value. Let me make it null or empty so that therefore it will, let's say, error or give me something else when I read through Logcat and when I try to go to the virtual environments. Well, when I set it to blank or null, the actual virtual environment came up with the default gray background. And I was shocked. I was like, what the heck is going on here? Like, now I'm actually seeing a background when I set it blank, but when I set it to an integer, it was black. And mind you, I only saw black from Meta or Facebook when I actually had reset the headset. This wasn't something that I was able to do from the headset automatically. So for me, this is even a weirder scenario, because this meant that Oculus or Meta or whatever did something to actually make it so that this is naturally set to an integer when it should never be set to an integer. It doesn't actually use an integer. When I actually went back in and it was set to null or nothing, I was able to see in Logcat that it would find out that it's null or blank and set it to a default. This default they sent the string for, and that string changed everything. I now knew that it was going to be a character string or an APK URI that has a path for where that file is. So now that I know it's a path, this changed everything. So my first test that I decided to do was go back into the user's database and change it from a blank or a null to the exact character string that they gave me when they realized that it was null or blank. And when I did that and put it back into the Oculus and restarted everything, that same actual virtual background environment showed up. So that means that manipulating that cell works, and it works by putting in an APK URI path. But this came with an issue. If I'm having to use an APK URI to be able to specify an actual virtual background, this brings up the question, can I be able to use a URL? Can I be able to use an actual path that would be on the actual Oculus headset? Because if I actually have to use an APK URI, that's going to be a harder issue, because that means I actually have to stuff the actual file into an APK in order for it to work. So that was a bigger concern for me in general. I start to do testing, and my worst fears were actually confirmed. You can't use something like the Linux folder path or URL to be able to dictate where this actual background file is going to be. You're going to have to use it from an APK. So that kind of sucked. However, when I started looking on Reddit, there was another person who seems to be further along with the actual Oculus reverse engineering process. I'm not necessarily sure, but through looking through his stuff, he had a Google Drive where he has a list of actual virtual environments that you could use already that he got from another Oculus. So because of that, I was able to download those. And then from that, I was able to put that into the APK that is necessary for being able to see those files for the virtual background environment. And then when I was able to use that, I was able to go back into my users database and switch the path to any of the file names, just as long as they were added to the APK, and it works. I was able to see bubbles, for example, and that alone, just switching from the gray background that they give you to the bubbles, proved that you can now switch your virtual background environment. And that's great. This was awesome. This was the type of breakthrough that made everything great. However, I'm not done. Obviously, if that was great, I would just wrap it up, and then make a video and then show you guys how to use it. But that's not something that's conducive for anyone else. If anyone else who wasn't really technical wanted to do this, they would have to go through so many hoops just to get a different background. And that's not acceptable. And so the main thing that I have to do now is figure out how to be able to actually use the settings to be able to show the list of virtual background environments so that a normal user can be able to choose a virtual background environment for their Oculus Go. My goal being is that if I can be able to figure this out, I can then be able to repackage up the Oculus Go image and be able to have this fixed where it's modified so that another person can be able to just use this. They can be able to then have their stuff working like as if it was back in 2018, where at least you have a list of virtual background environments. So that's where I'm going to leave the video, because currently I am working on it, and it actually goes into a whole thing when it comes down to Meta and the entitlement check and the verifications that they're doing, and that's the reason why, and that in itself is another video. But at least for right now, you guys can be able to understand that it is possible to be able to change your virtual background environment, just albeit very tedious. So hopefully I can make some progress in my spare time, and also the community can be able to make some progress in their spare time. And who knows, maybe I may not even have to make a video on me being able to break it. Maybe at some point I'm going to be making a video on how I found someone else from the community who's able to break it. And that's about it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you like the video, please like the video and subscribe to see more videos like this. And if you have any comments, concerns, or questions, please leave them in the comments below so I could love to interact with you guys. And other than that, I hope the rest of your day goes well. Have a good one, everyone.